Hello, everyone, and welcome. As you enter, please mute yourself, and if you can, change your name to read your organization, your name, and your title. And we'll get started in just a little bit. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to share right off the bat how you RSVP for the series in case you want to share this out. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. As you enter, please mute yourself. And if you can change your name to share your name, your organization, your title, would be wonderful. All right, we're going to get started. I'm going to do one more thing. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the third Discovery Workshop in our series. This is part of our Improving the Circularity of Compostables and Compost initiative. This is a 2-year initiative that is taking the whole system together. This is a Future Search Strategic Planning initiative, and today we are going to be talking with an amazing panel representing kind of the third back stakeholder group from the pile, so the large generators of food and compostables. And so we started with compost manufacturers, then we talked with haulers of food and compostables.
It's something that we just don't have the.
So please, a reminder to put yourself on mute.
And so we are working on a whole system strategic planning process. And so the intention of this process is to create a shared vision and common purpose with clear action plans based on the work that everyone is willing to do together. And what you're seeing here is our infinity loop, where we working forward, starting with kind of the beginning, manufacturers of compostable products, distribution, hauling, generators, haulers, and then to the compost processing facilities and everybody in between. And so this project is being led by an amazing steering committee, and we are working with the steering committee to plan a 3-day strategic planning event this September in Denver. And they are working on supporting all the different aspects of this project. Our work together is about a whole system strategic planning and systems change effort that's really focused on engaging pioneers from all parts of the system to come together to create a shared vision and a collective roadmap toward optimizing the circular economy of the U.S. composting industry. And this work centers, but is not limited to food contact compostables. And so this coalition across the U.S. composting industry is supporting this effort, is working towards designing an inclusive whole system circularity model for the health of the composting industry that maximizes environmental benefits, enables decarbonization, reduces solid waste, greenhouse gas emissions, and supports the use of finished compost. Also working to improve collaboration and coordination between all stakeholders in the compostable system, including policymakers, the supply chain, solid waste systems, and end users, improving the information flow between brands, packaging design, point of material sorting, and commercial composting processes for increased value chain effectiveness, identifying strategies to direct more food waste and commercial composting facilities that create value and confidence for all stakeholders in the composting system, and ultimately shift stakeholder behavior to mitigate contamination and the cost of contamination linked to non-compostable food contact packaging. And so this project is a 2-year project. It includes a number of different elements, 12 whole system discovery workshops. So that's part of what you're here today. So this is our 3rd discovery workshop in the series. And so these will take place from February through September. And then this will lead up to a 3-day Future Search Strategic Planning event in Denver. And then we will be activating the strategic plan for the year following the strategic plan development. We have had an incredible array of supporters to help us launch this project. And so a huge shout out and a deep thank you and gratitude for all the organizations. And then Chick-fil-A, who's here with us today, just wanted to give a special nod. They were the hosts of the original summit last March that kind of launched this whole project into being. And so just a huge thank you for Chick-fil-A for hosting that summit. And Ariel will talk a little bit about the Discovery Workshop series.
Hello, good morning. Yes. So we, as Candy said, this is the third of 12 discovery workshops that we're doing leading up to the in-person event in September. The purpose of this is to generate a whole systems understanding of the current state needs and challenges from every perspective from the system. These 12 groups also inform generally the direction of the different groups that will be invited to the event in September as well. So that is what we are working on with the steering committee, is kind of finessing these into 12 groupings. And then there will be a number of people from each of those groups that will be extended invitations for about 200. And that's happening within the next couple of weeks. And so what's really meaningful, I think, about these workshops is that it's informing a data-driven conversation to do strategic planning at the event. So you may have seen an email come out, a follow-up email from the first one and the second one with just some insights and some themes. And so we're theming that data, we're paying attention to that data, and that data is going to be centered in our conversation. So we can move even faster and move forward together with clear alignment when we're in person at the event. These sessions are every Thursday, so it's always the same time. It's usually twice a month. And our next one will be food service packaging distributors and broadliners on the 9th of May. And I will just put, if you haven't, I'm assuming most people here, I just put the Discovery Workshop RSVP link in the chat. So please share that with your friends, with your colleagues. This is open to anyone. It's free data, free knowledge from the source of all these different stakeholders. So please invite who you think might be interested in coming. And here are our panelists. So we have a great selection of panelists today. I'll just quickly introduce them. David Fridland, Environmental Sustainability Manager at Denver International Airport. Ian A. Brown, CEM RCS Facility Operations at Seattle Public Schools. Scott Jenkins, founder and board member of Green Sports Alliance. Sophia Armenikian, Head of Sustainability, Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena, will be reading some of her answers into the conversation today. Hannah Johnson, founder, CEO of Perennial Zero Waste. Don Rhodes, Sustainability, Corporate Communications, and External Affairs with Chick-fil-A. And Renata Neri, Packaging Compliance, International Marketing with Chick-fil-A. So thank you all so much for being here with us today. We are excited to harvest your knowledge and your wisdom. And we will be going, just from a process standpoint, we're going to be spending about going question by question, about 2 to 3 minutes for each panelist to answer each question. If you have questions from the audience, please direct them to the chat. Many times what we have noticed is they are very thoughtful, detailed questions, and we want to make sure that we allow panelists time and space to thoughtfully answer that. So most likely we'll be following up with those in the follow-up email. There could be perhaps a burning question that does get answered if there's readiness around it. We will, we have a lot to cover to get through all of these questions with all of these panelists. So please, keep yourself on mute, and please direct your questions. We want to hear them in the chat. It helps us understand where your head is at. All right, so the first question, I'm going to start with David. It is to understand the scale of your operation, how many sites are you collecting food scraps and or compostables from? And on average, what is the average tonnage volume collected? When and why did you start collecting food waste and or compostables?
Yeah, thanks so much. Excited to be talking about this topic. I've been working in the zero waste industry really all of my career, and some of which spent with eco products, working with composters and large generators too before I came to the airport. So been thinking about this topic for a while, so just glad to be involved in having the conversation. So at the airport, we have, I think, 13 or 14 centralized collection areas for our concessionaires and tenants. The vast majority of our concessionaires are participating. We have about 185 of them, majority of which are food service focused. So we've got a lot of people involved in the system. Last year we did about 266 tons of food waste. That was up from 91 tons in 2022 and only 5 tons in 2021. We also do a lot of wood to be chipped from our pallet collection program. Our compost collection program started really in like 2015, and it was just focused on, we want to increase our waste diversion. It kind of went up and down and then totally stopped during the pandemic, as you would imagine at an airport. We had a lot of challenges there. But we brought it back, and as you can hear now, 266 tons last year. We expect to be, above 300 this year, most likely, and it continues to grow as our airport grows. We're taking a few compostables. Mostly our collection is back of house for our concessionaires. So really it's whatever they're scraping off plates, but that does include, ramekins sometimes. So there's definitely compostables in the system. Of course, bags, we use a lot of bags. But it's primarily food waste because it's back of house. That is going to change in the next few years. 2022, the citizens of Denver passed the Waste No More initiative, which basically required all commercial entities to recycle and compost, including front of house, including public areas. So we're still waiting on the final timeline for those regulations, but we know that front of house will be included. So we expect that we have to expand in some way throughout our facility, front of house, in the next few years. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to Ian next.
Hi, folks. Ian Brown with Seattle Public Schools. I'm one of 2 resource conservation specialists. I'm here as a proxy for Rena Faamoe Cross, who's my coworker, who really knows everything about composting in the Seattle Public Schools. But you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So we have about 105 schools and a little over 50,000 students. We have about a 40% free and reduced lunch population, 155 languages spoken through our schools. We have about 6,000 breakfasts and 14,000 lunches daily. Our stats for waste, we have about 41,000 yards. I wish that we've talked about this a lot. It would be nice to know what our tonnage is as well, but we are charged by volume, which will come into play later on about, in terms of trying to conserve. What are we trying to conserve? Well, for us, it's volume. So if we can reduce our volume in waste, we'll be spending less and less greenhouse gas emissions. Recycle, it's about the same, 42,000 yards for a little over $400,000 a year. Compost is about a little over 1,700 yards, and we spend about $187,000 a year for that. Go to the next slide. So in 2005, City of Seattle had mandatory recycling, or the city may have had it earlier, but that's when we started mandatory recycling in the schools. And soon after that, we started having voluntary composting throughout the schools, so that by the time in 2015, when it became mandatory for schools to do composting, there were only a few schools left that had, the lift up to getting there. So we've had mandatory composting in all of our schools since 2015, but we've been doing it earlier. And this is, we'll get into this with some of the other questions, but this is never a one and done thing. There's always training that's going on. I was just at a high school 2 days ago to do a food waste audit, and with a bunch of students and an Earth Service Corps volunteer and one of the teachers there, which is fantastic. They help sort what's gone into the garbage that should have gone into the compost, what's gone into the recycle that should have gone into the compost, and weighing all those things so we actually have some data about where the problems are, and then we can go after the solutions. So we'll get into more detail about it later, but that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go over to Scott.
Hello, everybody. My perspective is from the sports entertainment side of things, and it started for me in Seattle, working at Safeco Field at the time with the Mariners. And as we were trying to track towards a zero waste operation, it became very apparent that the organic side of the house was going to be the key to getting us some big diversion rates. And getting to compostable serviceware was key to getting to our food waste problem. So from a percentage standpoint, the organic stream was the largest component of our waste stream. And when I started in Seattle, most everything was going to landfill. We did do recycling of commingled streams and cardboard and paper, but not much else. And as we started to move up the curve towards a zero waste success, we got into the front of the house organic stream with compostable serviceware and worked on our kitchens and our back of house streams. And so organics was absolutely key to our success. And we did get to a point where we had a 90% diversion rate. And likewise in Atlanta with Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which I opened up the stadium there. It took us a few years to get there, but they're now a zero waste stadium as well. And I'm here in Kansas City now at the Kansas City Current in the National Women's Soccer League venue. First women's professional sports venue ever built, purpose-built for women in the world. And we are just about to host our third match. We just opened up this spring, and we are set up for a front of the house organic stream, reusable cups, and then collecting aluminum because we won't have any plastic PET bottles in the building. So we don't have data yet, but our goal is to get to a 90% diversion rate, and the organic stream is going to be absolutely key to us doing that. So I appreciate everybody on this call and everybody in this group that plays such an important part in making these systems work in our business, which is sports and entertainment. The food the food program is the biggest waste generator we have, and without composting, we wouldn't be able to come anywhere close to a 90% diversion rate. So it's absolutely key to our success. So I appreciate everybody's interests and efforts at whatever part of the value creation chain you're at.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to read Sophia's responses from State Farm Arena. So she says, on average, we divert about 18K from the landfill for an event. State Farm Arena's zero waste operation accomplished the following in 2023. Recycled nearly 1 million pounds of materials. This primarily included aluminum, plastics, cardboard, glass, and more. Composted nearly 1 million pounds of food and organic material. Any food that could not be donated was composted. Composting is a natural process of turning organic matter, such as food and compostable serviceware, into a valuable fertilizer used by local farmers. Reused or donated 868,000 pounds of materials like food, electronics, clothing, crates, pallets, and more. Reduced annual waste by 365,565 pounds by eliminating paper tickets, individual condiment packets, disposable serviceware, and more. All material diverted from the landfill in 2023 totaled more than 3 million pounds. So that was Sophia's response. Big numbers there. Let's go over to Hannah with Perennial.
Awesome. Yeah. So Perennial Zero Waste is a zero waste consulting firm based out of Seattle. We're women owned. And we actually work with a lot of the bigger generators. So we work with large corporate tech campuses. We do large scale event management for zero waste. And then we also work directly with the U.S. Forest Service on type 1 and 2 wildfire camps. And that's actually what I wanted to zoom into today and talk about, because Prior to me joining this this effort 5 years ago, I had no idea that type 1 and 2, which are the massive wildfires that we're dealing with on the West Coast, basically have these small cities that are set up in the forest to respond to the fire. So you have thousands of people living at these camps, fighting the fire, eating, sleeping, you know, working at these camps for months at a time. And the amount of waste is staggering. So I wanted to jump into that today. So yeah, next slide. This is a dashboard that's publicly published of wildfires across the country that actually will hire recycling and composting services. So Perennial is one of those companies that will go to a base camp, set up recycling and composting services, and then manage that program for the duration of the fire. So you can kind of track these efforts during fire season. Next slide. So we've started doing some data analysis while in the field. And what we're realizing is, you know, of the waste that's generated at a fire camp, 70% of it is tied to the food service vendor. And then of that 70%, this is kind of a composition study that we did, 30% of it is just from single-use serviceware. Now, the government has a USDA bio-preferred purchasing program, which requires that caterers purchase bio-preferred single-use serviceware to serve their food on. And that is a lot of the material by volume that we're trying to manage. You know, is this actually compostable? Is it not? Is it trash? Is there food on it? So as the service provider, the Perennial providing these composting and recycling services on camp, we're really trying to figure out how best to educate the incident management personnel with what to do with their material. And it is at such a large volume. Next slide. Yeah, one more. There we go. I just wanted to highlight, just to bring this into reality, a couple camps that we worked on just last season. So this was the Lightning Complex fire in Northern California. This was a 50-day fire. Over the course of 50 days, almost 300,000 pounds of waste was generated, and 30% of that was due to food. So it was attributed to food waste. Now, we were able to find outlets for this food and capture this food to divert it, which was awesome. But sometimes we aren't actually able to do that. But this is just to give you an idea. This was just a single fire. Next slide. And then another fire that we worked on, the Bedrock fire in Eugene, Oregon. This one, over the course of 30 days, we were able to capture close to 50,000 pounds of food generated on this fire. So just huge volumes. We also did a national analysis, and we estimated that about 6 million pounds of waste was generated in the wildfire season for 2023 alone. And so if we have 6 million pounds and about 40% of that is attributed to food and food serviceware waste, you know, we're looking at millions of pounds of material that the service providers are really looking to manage. So I'll be digging more into this with our additional questions, but yeah, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. And then lastly, let's go to Dawn and Renata from Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, well, we are actually going to be tag teaming questions, and I'm going to hit this first one. But first of all, Hannah, that was fascinating. I had no idea. So I'm glad to be part of this to learn something new. Yeah, okay, so for Chick-fil-A, we operate restaurants nationwide. We're also in the Toronto area in Canada, and we are expanding. And then we're also in Puerto Rico. And so we do have both front of house guest facing organics collection and back of house collection. So the front of house is only in states and cities that are impacted by legislation requirements. The back of house program is available across the nation where facilities exist and the infrastructure exists to divert organics. So we do routine waste audits to understand our volume. We typically are trying to understand by different restaurant concept type, sales mix, and just trying to get an accurate picture of, you know, the volume of food waste coming out of our different kinds of restaurants. And so we know that the back of house is really where our opportunity to impact is. The front of house is generating minimal. Back of house is the largest. So in the front of the house, guest facing, we really only have about 11 pounds of food organic scraps per day, We do have 85 pounds of compostable packaging. This is just average, every restaurant is going to be different. But it's 11 pounds of food waste coming out of consumer facing. And so my joke is that our food is so tasty that, we really don't have food waste customer facing. But with the other thing that the front of house is generating is heavily contaminated sort station bins. But in the back of the house, we have a really clean stream. That's our largest volume. Average restaurant is generating about 268 pounds of scraps. So we do a lot of food prep behind the scenes. So it's lettuce rinds and, strawberry tops and hulls of tomatoes and things like that. And so, 268 pounds per day is pretty significant coming from a QSR. And so that's where we focused our resources for creating this back of house program. We actually started that in 2017 for back of house. That is when it's front of house, we're really only it's restaurants that are impacted by. And so that's, obviously impacting the date of when those restaurants started, of whenever the legislation comes into effect. But the back of house, we started putting together a program in 2017. We did a series of pilot tests. Actually, our first one was in Athens, Georgia. And so then we started putting backbone and structure around our back of house program and been gradually expanding it ever since. And just from a chain-wide level, last year in 2023, we had just over 9 million pounds of organic scraps diverted. So we are looking to increase that number next year.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move to the second question. Take it away, Candy.
Okay. So our next question is, are you currently providing food and/or compostable collection bins for your customers? What do you believe are the greatest opportunities that come with accepting food and compostable packaging for your customers, even if you're not currently offering this collection option? And so, David, if you'd like to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. So, we coordinate and provide our central collection areas, which includes rolling carts, in some cases, quite a few in one location. There's also, and that's on the ground level, the ramp level, so it's accessible by our hauler. So concessions will bring their material down from their kitchens to that central area, usually through an elevator. There are also on the sort of the more public facing levels, there's a lot of sort of smaller collection areas where folks will consolidate material into a rolling cart and then bring that cart down. So, we provide that. We also, if folks are starting, we will provide Slim Jims and bags. That's obviously not really sustainable in the long term. So it's really just trying to enticing them to come on and start their program. But really, in a lot of cases, they also don't necessarily need that from us. These are, fairly sophisticated and they have good supply chains. And so they can buy the things that they want that fit in their kitchen. So sometimes they need it, sometimes they don't. The other thing I'll say too, in terms of it's not typical infrastructure support, but we are starting a new program. We're calling it our Zero Waste Valet program. We got state funding to pilot it. We're doing it on our B concourse. If you've been at DIA at Den, B concourse is our biggest one. So we will put a team on the ground that will support the movement of material from the concessionaires to these collection areas to really try to help increase diversion. We anticipate they'll be doing a lot of cardboard and a lot of organics, but also probably some glass, some single stream, some food donation type work too. And the reason why I think it's important that we do these programs, especially in an airport environment where they really don't control, they don't control the lighting necessarily. They don't see energy reductions, right? It's hard to be involved in sustainability if you're part of this larger system. You don't have much control. So, one of the places where they can be involved is waste diversion. And so I think, especially with organics, it's a great opportunity for them to be involved. And that's sort of like their first step, maybe, especially if they're a line employee, an hourly employee. They maybe don't get to have that much control over what they do, but this is something that they have some serious, positive feelings about, which is great. The other thing I'll say too, from a larger perspective, right? We need these programs to reach our waste diversion goals. I think Scott said it really well, right? Like if we don't have front of house, organics, we're not going to reach our goals. And I think, you need packaging that fits in the system from either a contamination reduction perspective or, actually breaking down at the facility perspective, that can make these front of house programs work. So those two things together, right? We have to hit the diversion goals. And to do that, we need front of house. To do front of house successfully, we need packaging that fits in the system and makes that diversion possible. Thanks.
That's so great, David. Thank you. Ian, and let me get your slides up.
Yeah, so David's point is overall, what are we really focused on? It's overall waste reduction. So but our model is different because we have mandatory composting and waste sorting at all of our schools. So so first of all, what's important is that we provide the containers so that students and faculty can do the sorting. So we always try to pair them up in Dolly. So we will have Slim Jims for compost, we will have Slim Jims for recycle, and Slim Jims for waste. And oftentimes, if we can, you strategically place the waste a little further. So it makes people try to think about it. The other important thing is putting up posters and ongoing training. It's never a one and done thing. So, there's always educational factor going on, but we do have the mandatory composting, and we also have, I didn't mention that, that also includes serviceware. So utensils and plates or bowls all need to be compostable. But part of the reduction that we're trying to do is we are charged by volume. So even though we have compostable plates and bowls and utensils, they take up a lot of volume. So there are things that we try to do to ameliorate that. Well, one is to provide a little table so that students can stack the compostable trays, maybe, or bowls, so they don't take up a whole lot of volume when they get put into the compost. The other thing that we do is we try to create share tables for food that's not used and is still edible, to set it aside for either other students in the day. And there are a few schools where we have these pilot programs where they will actually take the food that's not used at the end of the day and give it to a food bank. But as what's showing on the slide here is we're really trying to, our garbage costs the most, so we're trying to reduce our overall waste and get everything into their proper streams. That does a lot for reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Also, if your composting is going into landfills, it's going to produce methane and the anaerobic digestion, whereas if it goes into compost, it's the circularity part that this is all focused on. So we're trying to, it's not just the compost, it's the whole waste stream thing. So we're trying to always educate staff and students about sorting properly, having clean products. Your recycling still needs to be changed. Or sorry, your recycling products need to be empty and clean to be put into the recycle stream. And the other big thing is contamination in the composting, where recycles or garbage gets tossed in there as well. So ongoing training. I'm not sure I hit everything on the question there, but the important part is posters showing where things go. We're also doing it in the kitchens and the backside, but really what we're focused on is if you're talking about like a commercial application, it's the front side, right? So the students coming in and doing the correct sorting, and doing waste audits, food waste audits is really helpful, especially if you have we try to have green teams at our school. So having someone there, this is not possible in commercial applications, but if you have someone there who's standing by the containers and just telling people, giving people a prompt about where to sort things, it helps immensely. So we have that opportunity in schools to have especially students, if students can do it. And I have to say that, the elementary school and middle school kids are way better at doing it than high school kids, because your brain's just everywhere else when you're in high school, and you just kind of dump things into the trash and move on. So training early is great. It's indoctrination, I guess, but that's what we're doing. We want to get the kids to learn, and they take that home as well. Because we have, for the city of Seattle, it's also composting, recycling, and garbage, separate streams.
That's great. Thank you, Ann. Scott.
Well, I think one underlying principle that's so important is keep it simple. And when we were looking at Safeco Field, T-Mobile Park now, some 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when we really just flipped the waste stream on its head. Last year's garbage landfill was this year's compost. And so we made it simple. We made it a two-stream system. We had bottles and cans and everything else. And we realized that by doing waste audits, that by managing our supply chain, we could simplify what the inputs were. And it was as simple as bottles and cans and compost. And so I've been doing that for the past 10 years. And it works very successfully. Obviously, you have to partner with your food partners to have the right inputs. And then I think the biggest opportunity we have by making compost available on the front of the house is just to get people to think about the waste stream. It's not really waste anymore. It's a resource. And in Atlanta, we didn't call it the trash room or the recycle room. We called it the resource recovery room, just to kind of change that mindset of this is material that should be used in some beneficial way, not just landfill or just make it go away. So in Atlanta, we did the same thing, bottles and cans and everything else, and they have a 90+ diversion rate there. And here in Kansas City now, reduce, reuse, recycle. Obviously, reduce is a higher order solution, and we're using reusable cups now here. So we don't have any plastic cups. We don't have any plastic bottles. All our beverages are in aluminum. So our streams here are compost, aluminum, and reusable cups. And so having a third stream was something I was a little worried about because, binary decisions are really easy. When you add a third one to that, people wonder what goes where. And by eliminating the landfill as an option, I know we do pick up some of that in our organic stream as contamination, but it's easily sorted out because it's a very small amount. But by picking the container, signing it appropriately, messaging in game, having the whole small for bottles and cans, having the whole small for cups, and then having a large opening for everything else. I think your container selection goes a long ways, as well as the graphics that go to support those streams. And we're getting very good results in our aluminum stream, very good results in our cup stream, and likewise in our compost stream. So I think we have an opportunity in our world to expose people to think about things differently, think about the waste stream differently. And I know we played a role in getting folks in Seattle to think differently about organics, and obviously the partners that make it happen, from the suppliers of the serviceware to the people that do the composting, are absolutely key in making that work so we can actually do it successfully. And then the other thing that's interesting in a place where landfill fees are very high, it's much easier to divert waste because there's oftentimes greater savings. In a place like Kansas City, the cheapest solution I have is to landfill it. So for me to divert organic streams costs money. So I've got to get a little creative about what I'm doing. And here we're baling aluminum and baling cardboard and baling plastic film. And then that becomes a higher value commodity for us. And we don't have to pay to haul things very often because we now have a really dense material stream. So we can save on the hauling, we can get bigger rebates, and we can drive our zero waste mindset back a house by doing it that way. And again, we're relatively new here, just about to have our third match, but our modeling shows that the cheapest way for us to handle the waste is to treat it like zero waste and to bale those three streams, even though we have to pay a higher cost to compost as opposed to landfilling. So we'll have some more data as we get through the season, but we feel good about the way we're approaching it and glad that we can help introduce the concept of organics on a bigger stage to get other people to think about ways of handling waste.
That's great. Thank you, Scott. And I Sophie from the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena couldn't be here today, but we're reading her answers into the space. And so, in speaking about the greatest opportunities, what she wanted to highlight was that it's ideal to have it be turnkey, especially in markets where the infrastructure is new and not easily accessible. And so that's what she wanted to share. And so, Hannah, let me get your slides ready.
Great. Yeah. So I would say for fire camp operations specifically, we do work across, well, my Perennial works across 7 different states for this work. So we don't really know where we're going or how far anything is until we get that call and we have 24 hours to mobilize. So that's been our challenge in really showing up to the site and saying, okay, we're going to provide compost service, because we have to come into a new space and understand the community, understand what infrastructure exists, what are the processing facilities. So we really have to do a lot of research kind of in real time to make this come together. But in the case of our fire on the Bedrock down in Eugene last year, we showed up. Eugene had an amazing commercial facility. They wanted all of our paper plates and our napkins and our food. And so we basically got to implement a full-scale front-of-house composting program for the firefighters, which was really, I would say, the first time that this had been done at this level, where we were really front-facing, educating them, showing them signage. So these are some photos here. The one on the first photo, that's a mound of compost kind of over time, but then that bottom mound with the plates, that was just from 2 meals of service at the camp. So that's what we hauled that day. Zooming over, I had staff members staff every single meal time. So they were interfacing with the firefighters, the management personnel, to talk about the program, to help people sort. And then we did custom signage based on what was actually being served at the camp. And I chose this kind of pinkish red tone for compost to draw attention to the fact that it's something new. It's something people need to stop and consider and think about and talk to us about. And we got just like a lot of really great engagement over those 30 days that we were there doing this. So I would say, yeah, for fire, that's really the approach that we take. We bring what we need, and then we just hope that we can find a facility where we can actually process the material in real time from those fires. And then next slide. For our consulting work, this is an example of REI. We actually designed custom bins and signage just for their events. So we got a little creative with them, and we did, the reimagine, make, and cycle is the recycling stream. Future unknown is this like ominous trash stream. And then earthworthy was the compost stream. And, all the REI employees are very interested in composting, interested in the environment. And so they loved what we did here. And we were able to just collect compost, super uncontaminated, a really great project that we worked on. But yeah, I would say as far as the benefit, aside from just the obvious environmental impact of keeping food waste out of the landfills, for fire camp, there's huge cost savings to reducing the amount of weight of food that's being hauled and the volume that's being hauled. On average, it costs about $1,500 per pull on their 30-yard containers out at camp. That's like an emergency rate. It's for a rural space. So if we can cut those costs down through a composting program, that's huge. And then for our consulting clients, I would say one of the big drivers is the USGBC True Zero Waste certification. So a lot of our companies that we work with want to be zero waste certified, and composting holds 6 different credit categories for that certification. So if we can help them get those programs in place and be successful in that, then we can also help them get certified. So I think that's all I got. Thanks.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Dawn and Renata.
All right, thank you, Candy. I'll take this one, but really is pretty much to reiterate a little bit of what Dawn already shared. So yes, a lot of our restaurants have a 3-bin system, especially in the state of California and other places that have those sorting requirements. But unfortunately, probably our biggest challenge and opportunity is contamination. And so if you think about, on the front of house in particular, as a QSR, most of the packaging that is in the front of the house, even if it doesn't have a lot of food scraps, it's contaminated. So the best end of life that we can probably give that packaging is through the composting stream. And that is definitely an effort worth pursuing. And so for that, we have tried multiple things on the front of the house. I can give you an example. We have one of our restaurants with 100% compostable packaging. We have multiple, but this is a specific restaurant using 100% compostable packaging. And then they do have a specific waste stream for water bottles and juice bottles that are PET bottles, and then additional compactor for landfill. And what we have done there is that in the city of Seattle in particular, we have adopted the green label or the green band as a way to easily identify the packaging at the level of the consumer and at the composting facility. So sorting and education, it's pretty obvious and easier for both parties. We also have changed all our sorting stations to have a very prominent visual, and those visuals include the green packaging as an indicator to post the compost wherever it goes. And definitely everything that is plastic, similar to what Scott Jenkins was mentioning, having those very specific streams for bottles to have the kind of the space just exactly to fit a bottle and nothing else. So even with all those efforts, contamination is coming really at 76% or higher, which is, it's again, just a sad and big challenge. And what we have found out is that we're trying to get creative about other ways of educating the consumer. One of the things that we have noticed is that we have the compactor, and that is kind of the default way of consumers kind of putting their waste away. And so think similar to what Scott mentioned, just trying to figure out if we get rid of the compactor and just try to make that a little more difficult for customers to not just default to put everything in the compactor or just put it away from the rest of the waste stream. So that is kind of the second step instead of the initial step for the customer. And at the end of the day, I think some of you guys mentioned it, but it's just kind of trying to not create more friction in the process and instead trying to model the consumer behavior to actually do the right thing instead of forcing them to do it differently. So we're trying different things as well. We have been looking into QR codes to use as an opportunity for digital education. And so the work is still in progress. But if you ask me, biggest challenge and opportunity, it's probably just that education piece to reduce contamination.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're gonna go to question number 3. So it's, what have been some of the greatest challenges your operation has dealt with when it comes to collecting food and compostable packaging from your customers? If your company has stopped accepting compostable packaging or food, why was that decision made, and what would have to change to accept them again? Let's start with David.
Yeah, so we have a few challenges for sure, and they're probably similar to others. Definitely contamination is an issue. As I mentioned, we have 185 concessionaires. So it's a lot of people touching the system. Not to mention, if we were to consider front of house, right, that's bins all across the concourses, with janitorial staff, and the general public, engaging more in the system, which, obviously brings contamination as concern. We thought about our contamination a couple years ago when A1 stopped accepting food service packaging, and we really tried to tighten it down. And what we sort of realized, right, is for our system at least, it's really those concessionaire employees that are just putting the wrong thing in the bin. And so to deal with that, we worked on education. We tried to provide timely feedback. And then the other piece of contamination was kind of what we would call like drive-by contamination. Somebody just putting a bag in the compost cart, because they're lazy or don't realize what it is. So we added locks to the compost carts. It's a very easy combination. It's not like we're trying to stump the employees. It just adds a barrier to where you can't just open up the lid and put something in. So that really helped. We also have, space constraints at the airport. We were built in 95, so we're kind of a younger airport actually, but we still, they did not design the airport in 95 to deal with recycling really, and certainly not compost. So, we've tried to navigate that, but space is a real concern. As I mentioned, A1 Organics, which was our processor, stopped accepting food waste and started rejecting loads due to contamination from folks, all throughout the system. And our hauler at the time was consolidating our material with other pickups. So, even if our material was clean, if somebody else's was contaminated, they would reject the load. So it was a big deal. And so we started talking with our hauler at that time. They eventually stopped really, combining loads like that. So it was really just coming from us, and they started taking it to their own facility, which they sort of restarted processing at that facility when those changes happened. So now our material is going to their facility. We get pretty good feedback from them, but it's a bit of a smaller system. Let's see. I would also just wanted to say here, Colorado just passed EPR, or approved the plan for EPR, which will include compostable packaging as a covered material, and compost processing as an approved end of life. So, I really hope that changes things in our system. There's also been a number of conversations with the various stakeholders about what do we need, and really where people landed on was, we need to work on a transfer facility that deals with contamination, monitors and removes contamination before it gets to the processor. So that takes time. It'll be a few years, I'm sure, before something like that gets actually built and put in place. But I think, there is an understanding that we will have a lot more material coming, a lot of material from front of house. It's going to be more contaminated. So we need things in place to really make the system actually work. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Ian, let's go to you.
Yeah, so challenges, again, we're in a slightly different model here, but if you can throw up that slide, Candy, we've had, when we implement these programs, we have to take into account a lot of different things. We have represented employees, both custodial and kitchen staff. So, we need to make sure that labor issues are addressed, because some of this involves extra work. So we want to make sure that that's recognized in the contracts that are going on between the district and the various labor unions. And just coordination and outreach. It's, like I said, it's an ongoing thing that we have to do. In the photo here, it's a great visual of how we try to set things up. So there's a table there that could be used for stacking compostable plates so they don't take up the volume so much. On the far right, you'll see there's a 5-gallon bucket on top of a milk crate, and that has a colander in it. That's for liquids, because it's a hell of a mess for custodial staff to take a bag of compost out and just have a ton of liquid in there. Or in the recycling as well, because we have milk containers and juice boxes that are theoretically recyclable, but they really need to be emptied. So we need a place, we need a receptacle for that. So it's all about outreach. It's all about labeling. Ideally, this setup would be set up against the wall, so you could not only have the containers labeled, but you could have posters up on the wall with actual items showing them above the correct containers about where things are supposed to go. We also really try to standardize and different languages for all the posters too, right? We have different schools that are really non-English speakers, so we want to make sure that we have posters in the students' languages. We standardize our colors. Forget who was talking about colors for our containers, but this has been standardized for quite a while. Green for compost, blue for recycle, black or gray for waste. And we really try to hold to that. And same with the bags. Composting is compostable bags. Recycling is clear bags. garbage are black opaque bags. And again, the best thing to do in terms of challenges for sorting is really to have someone at that station every day who's just sitting there with a pair of tongs and can just point, saying, that's compostable, that's not. And occasionally when things get dumped before they get a chance to suggest where things can go, they can reach in with the tongs and change the, change the bin that it's going in, which will reduce the contamination, which is going to be a perennial issue for everyone, except, where, Scott was talking about where you've reduced your waste completely and you have only so many options on the sized holes. That's fantastic. But we're not there. That would be great. But in terms of what way we are required to provide our students for lunches and breakfasts, and oftentimes these are pre-packaged meals that come from our central warehouse, prepared in our central kitchen. So we have a variety of facilities with different options. Some have kitchens that are simply reheating things. Some have really no dishwashing capabilities. I'll get into durables a little later on one of the other questions, but we have to adapt for what's provided in the school and what the situation in the school, whether it's languages, facility, whether we have dishwashers or not, and how many lunches are there. So can we have someone at every single lunch period that's at there? And, we have champions at different schools and they're fantastic. Sometimes they're the lunch people who are really zoned in on helping kids do the proper sorting. Sometimes it's a custodian, sometimes it's a parent volunteer, but that consistency, we want to have someone who's focused on sustainability at each one of our schools. So that's really an equity issue as well. It's not just about trying to get things sorted correctly. It's like we want to bring this to all students in an equal fashion. So the best thing is volunteers, honestly, for getting the correct sorting.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Scott, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we have really in our environment is back of house. Once we manage the supply chain properly and we have a simple system that's signed appropriately with the right containers, and again, the two-stream system is super simple. It's a bottle and can, or it's everything else. And again, here we've added the reusable cup program here in Kansas City, so we now have 3 streams. And I was a little nervous about adding the 3rd stream, but it's pretty obvious what a reusable cup is, what a bottle is, and then everything else. So the simplicity is the key here, working with your food providers to get the right serviceware, and working in a closed environment is key. Obviously, people are bringing things from the outside. You're going to have a lot of contamination. On the front of the house and even the back of the house streams, a sorting operation is key to making sure we get things in the right place. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. But the back of the house training in the food service areas is really the biggest challenge, because they're dealing with so much material that's coming in and packaging and stuff that's not easily recyclable. So there's a big training element there, and you have more streams than back of house than you have front of house. So where simplicity serves you well in the front of the house, you don't have that luxury back of house. So it is a little more complex. And I think with the number of people that work on a game day and the fact that we're not operating every day, and when we do, we have lots of people involved, getting that message out there and training them, and then communicating to them why we're doing it, how we're doing, celebrating the success, helps build awareness. And when you recognize people for doing good things, you often get more of that behavior. So I think a zero waste program can play a really important role in bringing a diverse group of people together, whether it's the fans, whether it's the seating hosts or guest services staff, or the food service people or housekeeping people. They all play an important role in us achieving our zero waste goal. So I wouldn't underestimate the value of bringing the whole team together and sharing our results and sharing that success, and getting people to feel a part of something in a large team effort that can really help get you where you need to go, because it's a heavy lift and it's not easy, and we all know it's messy business when we decide to change what we do. And so you have to be, you have to stick with it, and you've got to celebrate your success and your wins. And I think if you do that and you keep it simple, you can be successful.
All right, I'm going to read Sophie's response. She says, not applicable, but as a customer, the challenge is consistency in a program, especially when introducing the right way, aka new way to dispose. Keeping in mind the challenges in markets where everyone is used to all waste being thrown into one bin. We're going to move now over to Hannah.
Yep. I just second what everybody has said. Contamination is really, really tough. I feel like also PLA has been a really big issue for us because it is a confusing product, and a lot of people think, oh, well, it looks and feels like plastic, so I'm going to put it in the recycling bin. And that has just been something too that we're seeing the effects downstream. The composters don't want it. They're coming back to us saying we can't accept PLA. And so then we have to backtrack and pull that out of our program. So I love that this work group is happening, because that has been my biggest challenge as a program implementer, as an educator, is just having everybody on the same page when we move forward with bringing something to the public and engaging them and saying, this is how we want it done. If we're constantly backtracking or pulling things out or saying, oh, we're no longer accepting this, we lose so much of that trust and so much of that motivation for people to participate. And I get it. Like, it's with the recycling too. It's confusing. It's inconsistent. It just drives people nuts. And so I really think that composting can be streamlined to be easy, to be kind of a one-stop shop with the right serviceware accompanying the food waste. So I think that's a really big thing. I sat in on one of these calls a couple weeks ago and found out that paper towels are now an issue in the compost stream. And I was like, wow, really? Like that's just such a bummer, because paper towels make up a huge composition for some of my clients of their waste stream. So, now thinking about pulling that out of the program. So that's my challenge, is just how do I keep the trust with my customers while also dealing with kind of the mess on the back end of what's happening between the manufacturers and the product makers, and then the composters and what they want to accept, and then policies that cities are putting in place. How do I kind of bring that forward in a way that my customers can engage with? So that's kind of my biggest one. And then, I'll just second that. I know that having folks at every bin or doing, QC on contamination through a sorting operation is a big lift, and it's expensive. But I think in the long run, we want to be providing the composters with clean streams so that they can do their best work too. So I think having that process in place at the facility level is really, really, really helpful to actually building stronger composting programs, once it leaves that facility. So I'm a full advocate for having some sort of sorting happening as well.
All right, thank you, Hannah. And then Dawn and Renata, take us home.
I'll take this one as well. So for Chick-fil-A, I think, we have to think about us as generators, but also we develop a lot of the packaging solutions that go in the restaurant because of the nature of how we manage our business, and we cook from scratch in the back of house. A lot of the packaging that we use today has been customized for Chick-fil-A to kind of meet the quality standards and the operation flow that we have in our restaurants. And through that process, there has been a lot of challenges that goes from developing the packaging to certifying the packaging, delivering the packaging, disposing the packaging. And although all that, we have not stopped using it. But if I can probably highlight a couple, the first one is the fragmentation in the legislative landscape, the certification process, and the acceptance rules. That makes us really difficult. So essentially, we have been in the need of developing one packaging solution, one store at a time, depending on where you are located. And so that would mean meeting that specific legislative standard, that specific certification mandate, and of course, that specific acceptance rule at the composter level, right? And that makes it very difficult and very expensive. So a compostable packaging most of the time costs between 2 and 5 times more than a regular packaging in another store. And that drives the cost of that owner operator about 70% higher, which it could become really difficult for them to manage. And we are not talking that those costs go to actually Chick-fil-A Inc. Those go to the owner operator of that local restaurant, and that most of the time they only have one store. So for them to just kind of manage their business, this is an added cost that is really challenging. But secondly, and after all those efforts, and we still push that compostable packaging to go and do the right thing and be at the right place at the right time and all the things, most of the packaging continues to go to the landfill. And that be because one, front of house contamination, like we talked about, or two, because the local composting facilities are not set up for success to accept compostable packaging. So there is a true misalignment in between that legislation being pushed to actually accept all this from front of the house waste stream. And then the fact that those facilities are not set up for success to accept that packaging. So what we are generating at the end of the day, we call it expensive trash, but essentially that's what it is. It goes to the landfill. So if I can sum all this up into one word, I think alignment at the end of the day is one of our biggest challenges. And this alignment has to happen across the whole value chain, from the kind of the development side of packaging, materials that are going to be developed, labeling guidelines, certification guidelines, all the way to actually composting facilities kind of being set up to kind of properly manage packaging waste stream. So that's kind of my sum up.
Great summary. Thank you, Renata.
Yeah, and really well stated why we're doing this and why this is a whole system conversation, because as you can see, every single piece is connected to every other piece. And so want to start with our, well, I guess end with our final question, which for our panelists, which is, what should other stakeholders in the supply chain, the solid waste management system, and regulators take into consideration when problem solving around these issues? What would be the most helpful from your perspectives? And so, David, if you can start.
Yeah, I mean, I think for other stakeholders, I will say I'm really glad we're having this conversation with other large generators. I honestly do not see them that involved in Colorado. And so, there's a few, but generally they're not taking this as seriously as I think they should. I'm a little biased probably, but that's one thing I'll say. I would also say too, and I'm glad you're having, the food service distribution companies as your next one, I think, right? Or one of these.
Yep.
That's great. I don't see them at the table either in Colorado. And so I would say they should come to the table and be more involved and understand the challenge. And also they have a really unique perspective and can be a part of the solution. And so I, in that way, I welcome them to be part of the conversation. And I don't see them as much as they should. I would say also for the policymakers, and we have a pretty active legislature the last few years here in Colorado. They've done a few things that are pretty smart policy. We worked on the labeling bill. I think there was a lot of opportunity for additional feedback in that stakeholder process. It wasn't that robust, but it's a good step forward. And I think it will help us with contamination in the long run in Colorado. And also things like, EPR, having a good EPR system, like I think we're going to in Colorado, that might be one of the more successful ones in the nation, I hope. So I think we're doing good things, the policymakers are, but they're really not thinking about end markets. They're not thinking about some of these other, systems type things that we need to think through and just need to add some weight behind. For the solid waste management system stakeholders, I think haulers, quite frankly, need to adjust their business models to deliver higher levels of service when it comes to organics collection, but also recycling collection. It takes more feedback, more monitoring, more education. And honestly, in Denver, what we're seeing is these small organics haulers are eating up market share because the large haulers don't want to be involved in that way. I don't know. It's a big change for them. And maybe hurts their landfill business model if it's too successful, I suppose. But I think this is the way the industry is going, and they should be evolving faster. The final thing I'll say too, for regulators, because you had that in the question, and I thought that was an interesting piece. At least here in Colorado, what we've seen is, we need to relax permitting requirements for compost facilities. We need more. They take too long to build. It's too expensive. And we need them quickly, right? We've got the policymakers and the folks saying we need more waste diversion, more organics collection, but then it takes 7 years to build a facility, right? Like those two things don't work together. So I think, we just need to think through what that looks like. And we are doing that in Colorado. There are opportunities to relax the regulations so that facilities can get built faster, or you can build smaller facilities that might be exempt or something. So yeah, a couple good opportunities. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, David. All right, Ian, let me get my screen ready for you.
Yeah, so these first couple of slides are really, it's not about other stakeholders, it's still about us. But again, proper sorting at the front end is really important. You can go to the next one. It's just a good example of how to label things. Really important. Visuals. This is perfect. Up against the wall, the posters were right above the containers where things are supposed to go in. But in terms of other stakeholders, after David's just talking, I feel really fortunate. You can go to the next slide. Part of what we worked with Cedar Grove, who collects our compost, and they are really great at doing outreach to our schools. They come to our schools and assist in food waste audits. They provide tours for their composting facilities, which is fascinating. And if we can get students and staff to go to those things, it's a great, because they show us the whole process. They also show us why contamination matters. You get this great fine compost. You can take a handful of it, and you may find chunks of plastic in it. I mean, they do a great job of sorting too, but still things get through there, like food stickers. We also, it's very important to work with, our local organizations. We've got an organization called Earth Gen locally that works with Washington State schools to get schools certified, get students involved, and get them certified for various, it could be for energy, it could be for waste audits, it could be for food audits. And there are certifications that students can earn and green teams can aspire to in the individual schools. The same thing with we've been working with the World Wildlife Fund, doing a food waste warrior project where we have ideally what we would like to do is have a sustainability person in every single one of our schools. And I mentioned this earlier. This is an equity issue. We want all schools involved. And the Food Waste Warrior Project is something we're trying, where we are paying a stipend to a faculty member, teacher, counselor, could be anyone really, but a faculty member at the school who wants to be involved. Give them feedback over the year. So we try to do a waste audit at the beginning of the school, evaluate what's going on, do a food waste audit at the end of the school year, see if things have improved. It's opening up the conversation for the outreach aspect of it. And again, Cedar Grove representatives have been great in being involved with this. They come out and they help with the waste audits, and they help tell the students and faculty what the issues are on their end for gathering the compost. So I can't stress enough, work with other people and other organizations that are out there. The last slide is lessons learned here. Again, monitoring, stacking. Again, this is on the front end. It's not really about other stakeholders, but what works for us, but what also helps on the other end, if the better sorting we do, the fewer headaches that Cedar Grove has about it, the less compost material we're putting into landfills, less greenhouse gases emitted from methane generation. So it's constant outreach, working with your collector of compost, working with the other collectors as well. We have Seattle Public Utilities, which collects garbage and recycle for residential customers, but we have different clients collecting for us, but we still work with Seattle Public Utilities on doing outreach, and they help provide signage for us, and it's great. So work with what's available, work with people who are out there, just collaborate as much as you can.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ian. Scott.
I think, right from the get-go, we all know it's a very complex system we're trying to solve for. So we've got to collaborate with a lot of people. It really helps to have a can-do attitude, an innovative mindset, because we've got to do things differently. Status quo is not doing the trick. And I think what I found trying to promote sustainability in sports over the last 20 years is you really got to figure out, how do you create value? Like at each step, how do we create value for our partners? How do we create value for our fans? How do we create value for our employees? How do we reduce operating costs? How do we have our partners be successful financially? And I think if we think about the process from everybody's perspective, sure, it's hard. It's not easy, and you also have to have a little bit of fortitude to stick with it, because things don't always work, and they're not easy. But we learn from things and we figure out how to solve those things. And I think too, if businesses aren't innovative, other businesses will come in and innovate and replace them. So I think sometimes legacy businesses have a really hard time changing because they like the way it is. And so I think to be a bit disruptive from within an organization and prove that there's a business case for it, prove that there's better employee engagement, there's better customer engagement, and we can do it in a way, hopefully, that generates more sales, more revenue. So when we can create value, then we found a sweet spot at the intersection of business, sustainability, and taking care of the planet. So I just think you have to have a pretty broad perspective and bring people to the table, like-minded people, to try to figure out how to solve it.
That's great. And once again, I'm going to read in Sophie's answer to what should other stakeholders in the supply chain, the solid waste management system, and regulators take into consideration when problem solving around these issues, and what would be the most helpful. And what she shares is to continue working towards policies that are encouraging and enable access for the masses to compost. And so from her perspective, this is about having a system of support for what's generated at the end, a true circularity, which is you have compost and having buyers for it. And so, so Hannah.
Yeah. So my biggest thing was just reducing greenwashing. I love that CMA is trying to really get composter feedback to have a certification that represents what the composters will take. When I see things like the USDA even having a bio-preferred purchasing program, what does bio-preferred actually mean? What does it do in the long term downstream at these compost facilities? There's just a lot of vagueness in putting these terms out there in front of people who want to do the right thing, but then it's just confusing. So I love that we are driving towards, what actually breaks down and how can we certify it? And then how can basically manufacturers only make things that meet those certification requirements? And this is all in the name of, packaging, because I think that's such a huge part of the conversation. And then with that, I think just bringing about the streamline and consistency for people. The consumers really, waste has been something that people constantly feel bad about. There's just a guilt and a shame that follows us around our choices around waste. Did I put it in the right bin? Did I, contaminate something? Did I buy too much? It's confusing. There's just a lot of negativity around it. So I think too, to Scott's point with value, it's like creating a system that brings the consumer value in feeling like they've done the right thing and they didn't have to think too hard about it. It was obvious choice. It was the right choice, and it didn't have negative downstream impacts. So, really that's on kind of the design and infrastructure side in programs, in infrastructure and facilities that we're focused on, but then really having the manufacturers making products that we know will compost. So I know all of this work is being done, and this is why we're all here, but I think just keeping with that, because that really is the answer, is just streamlining, consistency, making this something that everybody can do, and having processing facilities across the country that are accessible. I'm from Seattle, and I love to tell people, we are very fortunate to have access to compost. Like, we have compost in our curbside carts. Like, that is so, most of the country doesn't have that access. And so just kind of remembering that and like continuing to push that forward as well. And obviously policy, plays such a huge role in all of this. But I think, to David's point, we can't push policy that isn't actually feasible for the communities and the folks who are having to engage with that policy. So thinking through all of those layers. So kind of everything.
All stakeholders.
Yeah, all of it.
That's great. Thank you, Hannah. All right, Dawn and Renata, if you want to bring us home for today.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting being, the last voice after some really great answers. So yes to everything that's been said. I think as I've been listening to this, I think the additional perspective that we can provide is that we're a national brand, and we have individual owner operators who at the end of the day they're making a business decision. So for us, from a brand perspective, building up the infrastructure, with cost in mind and just service reliability, I think is key, because, that will be ultimately the deciding factor, in helping us get restaurants in areas that maybe aren't as, sustainably minded, or you haven't had the really long-term access to compost as Seattle does, just in helping us build up our program, which is opt-in. Yeah, so ultimately they're making a business decision that needs to make financial sense, but also that they can trust that they're going to have the service reliability, because that is a common pain point that I hear, particularly with like some of the smaller haulers. It's just infrequent service, and it's undependable, and then they end up with overflowing compost, and then that gives a negative perception. So yeah, just I think it's multifaceted. Renata, you want to chime in with anything else to bring us home?
Well, I think from the packaging standpoint, I think I probably will take the opportunity to, in a way, repeat what I already said. I would love to see the industry move from a localized approach to a more national approach. And that would come from the certification, through the acceptance schemes, through all the space in between. I think the localized approach is just really making it really challenging to adopt a compostable model overall. We are now developing packaging depending on location and the capabilities that composting location may have in order to process packaging. But the reality is that is not long-term feasible. Not only because of the cost of packaging itself, driving the cost of the operation for that owner operator, but because timelines get just immensely long. And so at the end of the day, we're not moving the needle fast enough. Our distribution systems are not set up to distribute one packaging, one store at a time. And so there is just a lot of failure and contamination just from that standpoint as well. So in general, just moving from this localized approach to a more national approach in all parts of the value chain, I think that would be probably a dream. If we think about it from the customer standpoint, we have been talking a lot about what a challenge is from the customer education standpoint. It also helps at the customer education. It is really hard, drives me crazy to think that you go still to states where you go to the green bean and the green bean is recycling instead of composting. So even at that level, we just don't seem to be aligned. And so if we could just make all this, alignment exercise fruitful, I think that we are on track to develop something that can scale up moving forward. So I'm still very grateful to be here and having the opportunity to talk about this. And I'm just really looking forward to continuing collaboration.
That's so great. Thank you so much. And the idea of this project really is about alignment and starting from the perspective of understanding the perspectives from where everyone sits in the system. And so in this strategic planning work, the first step is always discovery, is always how do we understand what is? And in this amazing, large, and complex system that has so many different pieces and parts, the intention of this work, of these discovery workshops, is to give a space for all of the different stakeholders to say what is from their perspective, what's working, what's not working, what they hope would work better, what they need from the other stakeholders. And so this whole series and this whole system is about giving a space for those voices and those perspectives in the run-up to a very intense 3-day strategic planning event in Denver. And so we would love your support. We would love your participation. We have 12 of these workshops in the series, and this was number 3. And so you just heard from the large generators of compostables and food waste, and we will be looking next in kind of the line of kind of how materials move through the system to the packaging distributors and broadliners. And so we've got an incredible panel coming that's coming up in May. And so these workshops are free. They're available to anybody. We post the videos of these workshops on YouTube afterwards. We've put the how to RSVP for the series in the link. And then all the wonderful questions that you've asked our panelists, we're going to gather those and work with the panelists to come up with a Q&A that we can share afterwards. And so you will see that. So here's your last chance to ask your questions. Also wanted to note that the University of Washington wanted to be here today. They couldn't, but what they're going to do is they're going to take our 4 questions and they're going to ask them to their listserv board of universities kind of across the United States. And so as we gather that, we're going to be posting that information back too, because this is all incredible data, really important to understand, because everybody has where they sit in the system and then their next concentric circle of who they work the closest with. And then as you get further and further out, you may not understand that a decision that you make or a thing that you're doing, whether you're at a municipality, whether you're a packaging designer, whether you're a hauler, whether you're a compost manufacturer, that different changes in your own system impacts the rest of the system. And so loving these conversations, sitting in such deep gratitude for all of our panelists. Thank you for being here today. In the audience, as you listen to these, as you look at kind of the panels that are coming up next, if you say, oh, I'm in that stakeholder group, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to bring your voice into the room. So thank you so much for being here and really appreciate all of you and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks at our next discovery workshop. Ariel, anything you'd like to share?
If you are interested in being a shared funder of this work, it is a collaborative model and how we're resourcing all of this. I put the commitment form in the link and in the chat. And if you missed the first or the second discovery workshop, we do have a YouTube channel with the recordings of those. So this recording will be uploaded on there, and we'll send it out in our recap along with the Q&A and the themes probably early next week. So thank you so much. Really, really good data that's emerging. Obviously, there are themes, I think, that I'm hearing across the 3 groups so far, and that's super helpful for our process. So thanks for coming, and see you next time.
Thank you.